Go. Let's talk about Ford and GM. Now that last week they actually shared their earnings call. This was really nicely done by Omar, where he shared the kind of the comparison. So you got GM at $44 billion, Ford at 45. They're very similar revenue. Tesla's at 25. Tesla's already half, more than half of what they're doing. They're, they're catching up very quickly, but their income, their profit, Tesla's profit is already the same as GM's and more than Ford. So that's always been the story. The margin is so strong despite selling less cars. They're only selling a third less cars because they've just started. Once they expanded the Cybertruck, once they exclude the compact car, and they revise the Model 3, you can easily see that this is going to go up. And these sales, this is all cars, including ICE vehicles. And
Hmm.
so there's going to be an exponential drop in ICE vehicles, an exponential rise in EV. And then this is a
Yeah.
fantastic analysis by CERN Basher. Oh, sorry, did you want to say something?
No, just
Yeah.
the growth, the profit per vehicle, I think is what is coming out for Tesla. Even again under this transition they did in the first half, they're still significantly more profitable per vehicle. And that's what that data is showing.
Okay. So I love this new analysis by CERN Basher. And he says, because Ford released their data, kudos to Ford for being transparent. Now let's compare where Ford is now to where Tesla was when they were in the same stage of their startup business when Tesla was still trying to start to create their first EVs, just like Ford is now. They put together a comparison of Ford Model E, that division where they're creating EVs, versus Tesla, and we're comparing March of 2023 and June of 2023 of Ford to where Tesla was in 2017 and 2018. So if you look at this, let's jump to the loss per vehicle. Right now, at this stage, Ford is losing $60,000 per vehicle, and they cut it in half. So now they're only losing 31,000 per vehicle. Well, when Tesla was at this stage, they were initially losing 24 and now they're losing 17. So they are already 50% less loss. Did I just say that right? 100% less loss. Uh, but their margins, of their loss of margins is 21% versus right now, um, Ford is at 60%. And so they're making more revenue at the time. They were selling more cars. I'm sorry, they were selling the same amount of cars. At the time that they were selling the same amount of cars, that's how it's different.
Yeah.
What's your
So
thoughts on this?
a lot. I mean, first off, these it's a it's an optically a nice looking table, but when you kind of look behind it, there's a lot more going on. First off, Tesla ships directly to consumers. So when Tesla has a sale, somebody actually buys the
Right.
car and takes it home. And Ford is selling into dealerships. And so when you look at that's why it's tough to look at 1 or 2 quarters and you with that model is because they have a link in their chain that Tesla doesn't have, and that link is holding a bunch of inventory. So what we've seen with EVs at Ford and GM is we've seen them double the amount of inventory days of their ICE business because they didn't, they famously didn't move on pricing until very recently with Ford. But they didn't move for so many months and kind of folded their arms and said, "We don't need to do this. We're fine." And then their inventory days doubled on their EVs. So when you look at this data, you have to understand that Ford is selling into dealerships, and then those dealerships aren't moving the cars, and that's just building up. And that's why Ford came out and said that instead of losing, I think, was it 1.5 to $3 billion, they're gonna lose $4.5 billion, um, in their EV business this year. So as they ship more cars, their losses are accelerating. They have a real this is a real inventory problem. The things that we see going on with Tesla going from 12 to 16 days DOI, that's not a real inventory problem. This is a real inventory problem. They have upwards of 90 to 200 days of inventory on some of these EVs. And so that's why this comparison is tough to do. But the one takeaway you can have is that there's tremendously Tesla's a much more efficient company, much lower overhead, and that's the way Elon runs his companies very, very efficiently, and that overhead in Ford is really it's really crushing them, and that their losses cutting in half, that's gonna asymptotically reach a point. It's not like as they grow more volumes, they're gonna make, tons of money per vehicle. It's not gonna happen that way. That's dependent on the design and the manufacturing unit economics of the vehicle, and I believe that's just going to asymptotically reach some point of maybe 10 or so $1,000 of loss. Maybe they get to break even, at some point. But even Ford themselves have said their aspirational goal in the next 2 to 3 years is or 4 years is to get to, I think, 8% um, EBIT margins, so mid single digit margins. So they actually don't have the design, they don't have the product, they don't have the design or manufacturing method to have, double digit margins on their product. So there's a lot going on behind that table.
Yeah, that's a good point. So if you see the table that says wholesales versus production, and we've already reported in the past that Ford is sending it to the dealers, but the dealers have told them to stop sending it because inventory has gone up. Good point. So the confusing part about this, or the misleading part, is that you can see that the Ford has been able to reduce the loss per vehicle, and so did Tesla, right? But here's what is very interesting. Here's what happened to Tesla in the following quarter after this March 18th. At the following quarter, Tesla produced 53,000 EVs, but they lost the largest amount in a single quarter, 621 million. He says, I'm sure Elon remembers as well because as you grow the company at this point, that's where, you're just trying to scale, your losses go further. So what's going to happen to Ford? They're going to be even more losses. Imagine that. They're already losing so much money per vehicle. They're going to go more losses as they continue to scale up production until they finally tip the scale on operating efficiencies. That's if they're able to sell more cars. And the question
Well,
is, will they be able to do that?
yeah, and
Yeah.
what they said on the call is they said they're making a turn, and the turn is they were supposed to get to a 600,000 vehicle run rate by the end of 2023 on EV. That means an annualized run rate of 600,000 vehicles. And so I guess what is that? Roughly 50,000 a month. And they said they're not gonna hit that. They said they're gonna move that. They didn't say in the first quarter of 2024, they just moved it into 2024. So they moved that target out. Again, this is what you see with GM, this is what you see with Ford. They have these analyst conversations, they set these targets. The analyst's like, "Okay, great, they're ramping up on EV, this is great." Come a couple quarters later and they continue to push these targets out because Ford knows the more they ship on this current generation of vehicle, the current design, the current inefficient designs of the Mach-E and the F-150, they'll actually accelerate their losses. So they'll accelerate that loss per vehicle, and then they'd actually have to build out more capital to accelerate their losses per vehicle. So like we don't want to do that. So they want to push that out as far as possible. And what you're going to see is 2024 is going to blend into 2025 and say, well, we don't need to do this in 2024 because we have this new vehicle lineup coming in 2025. That's the playbook, mark my words. And um, and it's synonymous with what we've seen from Ford and GM uh, over the past 5 to 10 years in terms of their comments on EV.
Yeah. And then this is when Ford F-150 has no competitor. And now what happens when Cybertruck is out? Ford 150, I'm sorry, the electric version, right?
Yeah, and they have a
Okay.
competitor in Rivian. They're Rivian's outselling them, I think 2 to 1. So they have a
Jesus.
competitor, and they're being outsold by a startup. So, again, we want
Wow.
them to do well, but it's just one
Yeah.
of these things. So Ford publicly said that they're gonna focus more on hybrid, and that's the way they're going
Yeah.
to, ship more efficient vehicles in this time frame. So I think the playbook they're running is between now and their 2025 vehicle lineup, they're going to deaccelerate their losses in EV. They're going to push out their targets. They're going to try to ship more hybrids and to get more of those dollars back in from an IRA perspective and from the government and to keep them off their back. I think that's the play they're running.